Like many of you, our entire team is currently working from home. We are based in New York City, the American epicenter of the coronavirus epidemic. And so we ask your patience to bear with us if there are any technical difficulties in our procedure. The biggest news of today is that the $2 trillion stimulus package appears to be close to becoming a reality. We expect the president is going to talk about that a good deal. I'll tell you what I know about it. The bill contains about $150 billion that will be directed at hospitals and healthcare providers. It contains what Chuck Schumer this morning called unemployment insurance on steroids. It seeks to increase benefits on everyone's unemployment checks by $600 and allow full pay for up to 4 months. A big sticking point in the negotiations up to this point has been what Democrats were labeling as a $500 billion slush fund. That is $500 billion that the president was going to have basically unfettered ability to spend as he saw fit, including potentially bailing out Trump hotels and Trump businesses. Now, through extensive negotiation, that fund is going to be much more carefully managed. A Treasury Department Special Inspector General will be set up to monitor how the money is spent, and it is specifically barred from any of that money being made available to any Trump business, or for that matter, any business that is owned by a high-ranking government official. Now, there are a lot of payments to state and local governments. These are likely to come in at around $150 billion. Already, Governor Cuomo is objecting that the money is being too evenly distributed across all 50 states as opposed to being targeted at the states that are worst hit. Governor Cuomo said this morning in his press briefing that the plan he had most recently seen allocated only about $3.8 billion to New York, which may sound like a lot, but when you consider that New York is looking at a $15 billion budget shortfall directly as a result of the coronavirus, that appears to be not an ideal number for the state of New York. Now, New York received nothing in the first round of coronavirus response funding. This new bill will change that, but not to an extent that the governor found satisfactory. Now, just to remind you where we are in terms of this pandemic, this week the number of global cases crossed 400,000. It's now currently nearly 460,000 in the world, and 62,000 of those cases are here in the U.S. The U.S. has the third most cases of any nation, and that number is likely to rise as testing is performed more widely. We have the disadvantage that until the past week or so, aggressive testing has not been happening within the U.S. At yesterday's press briefing, both the president and vice president celebrated the fact that more people had been tested in the last 8 days than in the previous 8 weeks. And that's a good news, bad news situation. It is good that the amount of testing has gone up, but it only highlights how insufficient the testing was before. I would want to point out to everyone who sees these rapidly growing numbers within the U.S. and feels alarmed by them that while, yes, the situation is indeed alarming, the rapid increase in diagnosed cases does not necessarily mean that the virus is spreading that quickly. It's just that we are catching up. We are identifying the people who had not previously been identified as having the coronavirus. To date, 869 people have died in the U.S. That is out of more than 20,000 deaths worldwide. On the bright side, we are seeing that nearly 114,000 people around the world have recovered from the coronavirus. And we have gotten encouraging information recently from China that the number of new cases is decreasing. There is always some grain of salt that needs to be taken when receiving information from China, but that does give some cause for optimism. Now, getting back to this bill that is in the works, let me see what else I can tell you about it. Well, one of the most interesting parts for many people are the direct payments to Americans. Most middle-class families will be receiving about $1,200 per person, per adult person, plus an additional $500 per child. These checks are going to be coming out for many people through a direct deposit. If you receive tax refunds from the IRS through direct deposit, you are likely to receive your coronavirus payment in that method. However, the New York Times reports that Americans who are not set up with direct deposit could wait up to 4 months to get a check. There is also, in this bill, a suspension of student loan payments through September 30th. So that's good news for people who are struggling to pay their student loan bills. Also, while there is defense spending money in this bill, there is specifically no money set aside for a border wall. And that only makes sense because the U.S. is not at high risk of having people bring this virus across our southern border. If anything, it might be Mexico who finally wants to pay for a wall to help the U.S. Stop bringing cases across the southern border, because Mexico at this point has only about 400 total cases of the coronavirus as compared to the 62,000 in the U.S. Now, this week, President Trump has been making the optimistic declaration that he thinks that the U.S. can be back to business as usual by Easter. He said that he picked the date of Easter because it's a beautiful date. It does not seem to be a date picked based on the guidance of public health officials. In fact, the near unanimous consensus of public health officials across the world is that the U.S. needs to continue to tighten its restrictions on social gatherings, not loosen them, if we are to curtail the spread of this virus. Easter is, in many ways, a beautiful date for those Americans who celebrate Easter. Of course, as many as 35% of Americans are not Christians, and the date does not necessarily mean anything for them. For those of you who are suffering through this, we are here for you. We are trying to present you with the best possible information. We are based here in New York, America's epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. And today, Governor Cuomo was talking about some of the reasons why the coronavirus hit New York State worse than others. One of the reasons he said is because people come here from around the world. And another obvious reason is because we are all so physically close to one another. But he highlighted that our closeness, while in this instance it created a danger to us, it also is the strength of New Yorkers. And we are seeing reports from people who have lost loved ones, people who are struggling with this disease. For the majority of people who get it, this will not be a fatal disease, but even if you have it and are healthy, You could pose a danger to the people you love. You could pose a danger to people in high-risk groups, to older people, to people with underlying health conditions, and it is important to maintain the social distancing guidelines that have been suggested to us. Now, I'm going to take a look and see if any of you have questions that you would like to put to us, and see if we can take an opportunity to answer those questions for you while we're waiting for the President of the United States to come out. The President is about to give his daily press briefing with the Coronavirus Task Force, and we are, if you're just joining us, NowThis, bringing you our attempt at a live fact check and commentary on the President's address, because we have seen that the President sometimes uses this opportunity to spread information that isn't always accurate. My name's Alan Piper. I'm the senior politics producer at NowThis, and I'm here with the support of our entire newsroom, who are each working from their homes, as, like the rest of New York, we are sequestered in social distancing, social isolation to avoid the spread of this virus. And I'm reading some of your comments right now to see if there are questions that we can answer. And I see someone, the questions go by so fast, I'm not able to identify the person who posted it, but someone posted a question about what is the federal government doing to make sure that states across the country are taking adequate protections. This has been one of the main criticisms lodged at the President, is that there has not been a uniform policy put forward, that governors have been left on their own to develop individual statewide plans of response to this pandemic. And in fact, the President earlier this week was saying to governors that it was really up to them to get the equipment and the gear and the supplies that they need to treat this pandemic. At the moment, the most populous states in the country have all engaged in some form of shelter-in-place or stay-at-home rule to try to prevent the spread of this pandemic. I'm looking through your comments now to see. Some of you are very displeased with our President's response. All right. Well, those comments are going by so fast that unfortunately I'm not actually sure if I'm able to address specific answers to them. Perhaps other people in our newsroom can flag comments and try to get you answers to questions that you have. We are awaiting the President's arrival. The Coronavirus Task Force will be speaking shortly. The President this week has been suggesting that April 12th is the date when everything will return to normal. The Surgeon General has said the reverse. He's said that things are going to get worse before that they get better, that we are not nearing the end of the worst of this. The governor of New York has said that the month of April and the month of May will be months during which our state is harder hit than it has been in March. So the idea of returning to normal by April 12th seems not to be so likely. Carlos asks, what happens with the millions of people who have part-time jobs and lost the second job? And what happens to those who make so little that they don't even file taxes? You hit some very important points, Carlos, in what is in this bill. We don't have all of the information that is in it, and the final details are getting worked out now, but one of the largest sticking points that Democrats have had with this bill is that it does prioritize people who are income tax payers, and that at least the original version of the bill that was put forward by Republicans did not have any provision in place for those Americans who are not of the income level where they pay taxes. And there are many Americans who fall within that category. Seniors on Social Security, people who are low-wage workers. It is unclear whether the current iteration of the bill will have anything for them. We do know that this bill will have some provisions in place for gig workers, for people who are not actually employees of a company and who have lost work as a result of this. They will be eligible to receive some of this federal aid, and the language, I don't have the most recent language, but the CNN is reporting that independent contractors and gig workers will be eligible to receive federal aid, and that millions of part-time workers who drive for Uber or deliver for Amazon will also be receiving aid. And Michelle asks, these big companies will get a bailout and then write off their loss next tax season. Isn't that double dipping? We don't have all of the information for you there about this, but we do know that certain safeguards have been put into place on the money that would be used to bail out businesses, safeguards that earlier in the week were not part of the bill. Some of those include the fact that companies will not be able to use it for stock buybacks. That was something that we've seen in the past, where the government bails out a business, and instead of using the money that's received to bolster its workforce and keep its workers employed, it buys back its own stock or it gives bonuses to its directors. That is specifically barred under the course of this bill, while even a year beyond having received some of these funds, companies who receive it are barred from engaging in stock buybacks or from using it to increase executive pay. Okay, we have some interesting questions coming in, and our research team is looking at the questions that you are posting and working to get the answers for them. Tracy asked if we could repeat the student part of the relief bill. My understanding is that the current version of the bill will suspend federal student loan payments through September 30th. So that should be some relief for people who are saddled with high student debt at this time. Democrats had sought to get overall debt forgiveness for student loans as part of this bill. Republicans have pushed back on that. The current compromise seems to be the suspension of payments through September 30th. And I'm reaching out to our team to see if we can get more of the answers to the questions that you are asking. We are, again, if you're just joining us, we are NowThis, about to present you the Coronavirus Task Force briefing with the President of the United States. I'm Alan Piper, the senior politics producer of NowThis, and I am backed up by our incredible team, each of whom is working from home, as part of New York City's mandatory stay-at-home policy. We actually have staff around the nation who are all being impacted similarly. I suspect that most of, if not all of you watching are watching from home and are probably eagerly awaiting information as to when you might be able to venture out of your home. It has been largely the governors of states who've been providing this information. There has not been a wealth of reliable information at the federal level. We have seen that the daily briefings of governors like Andrew Cuomo in New York or Andy Beshear in Kentucky, we've seen that these daily briefings have become must-see TV, basically, for people eager to tune in, even from outside of the state, to try to get an idea of what is happening. I'm going to, while our team looks up additional information on the legislation that is working its way through Congress, I'm going to just update you on what it is that we know at this point. Again, the current total number of cases in the world at this point has just crossed 460,000. The U.S. currently has nearly 63,000 of those cases. The U.S. has the third most cases of any country, just behind China and Italy. It is very possible that the true number of cases in the U.S. is much higher, because it is really only within the last 8 days that widespread testing has been occurring within the U.S. Here in New York, we watched Governor Cuomo's briefing, and we heard his estimate that the apex of the crisis in New York will be coming within the next 21 days. That would certainly tend to fly in the face of President Trump's suggestion that America will be returning to business as usual within the next several days. We know that 28% of all the testing that has been done nationwide has been done by New York State. We know that the United States has been lagging behind other countries in testing. An important country to compare our response to is South Korea's. South Korea diagnosed its first case of the coronavirus the same day as the United States. And unfortunately, it has taken until, I think, this past week for the U.S. to perform even as many tests as South Korea has performed. And that, when you factor into it that the U.S. has such a greater population, as of last week, the number of tests that had been performed by the U.S. per million citizen was only about 300 as compared to, I'll have to pull up the stat, but as compared to a much higher number from South Korea. The U.S. really has been behind in testing, and this is in spite of the fact that the president was briefed by the National Security Team in January, warning of the danger of this threat. The president's statements have shifted over time. We know that he was briefed of the danger in January, but in February, on February 10th, he was suggesting that it was not a big deal, that it would go away of its own accord by April. On February 26th, he compared it to the flu. On February 28th, he used the phrase hoax to describe it, saying that this is the Democrats' new hoax. On March 3rd, he said that that he did not believe that it would spread across the country. On March 4th, he suggested that many people who have coronavirus would be fine to go to work with it. And that same day he said that the U.S. response had this, quote, very much in hand. It's important to note that there were only 158 cases in the U.S. when he said that it was very much in hand. And now there are over 62,000 cases. So under the current draft of the bill, single Americans who are earning under $75,000 will receive a $1,200 payment. Couples would receive a $2,400 payment at double the income level, and those earning over $99,000 get phased out entirely. The qualifying income levels will be based on your 2019 federal tax returns, unless you didn't file, in which case it would be based on the 2018 tax returns. So yes, people are asking, is this based on your reported tax return income? And yes, it is. Parents of children will see $500 for each child under 17. And these payments are to be made ASAP through direct deposit, but the New York Times reports that those people who do not have direct deposits set up with the IRS are likely to wait for months before getting a physical check in the mail. If you're just tuning in, this is NowThis live broadcast of President Trump's coronavirus task force. We are expecting the president any minute now. My name is Alan Piper. I am the senior politics producer. And we are going to do our best to provide you real-time fact check of what the president is saying and answer your questions about what is happening, what may be in this stimulus bill that is working its way to completion, and just what questions you might have in general. Now, Lisa is asking a question about the payment for children. My understanding is that the current bill has $500 for every child who is under 17 for families. But that is only for families with a combined income under $200,000. Over 100 families with a combined income over $150,000, there is a phase out of the payment. It starts getting less. I don't have the exact stat on how much less it gets. But basically, most middle-class families will be receiving some money. Now, the question, which is still unclear, is what happens to people who don't pay federal taxes? This is based on your tax rate. So there seems to be a lot of protection for middle-income Americans, but it is unclear if lower-income Americans, Americans who earn too little to be paying income taxes, whether they will be receiving a benefit under this. I know that that was a sticking point for Democrats in an earlier version of the bill. Democrats were seeking protections for the most vulnerable Americans. It's unclear if that is in the current version of the bill. Our fact checkers in the newsroom will attempt to get the most recent information and see what provisions there are for Americans who are earning too little to pay taxes. Ledeuce asks, what happens if you did not file in either previous year? I'm going to try to get the answer to that. I suspect the answer is that it will be the most recent year on file, but we will try to get an answer, a definitive answer to that, to you. People are also asking if it is too late to set up direct deposit with the IRS. We're going to try to get a definitive answer on that. I suspect that it is going to be based on how you received, how you filed your taxes last time around. So if you did not receive a return via direct deposit on your no, actually I do have the answer for that. It is based on the most recent taxes. If you file your taxes now, if you file the taxes now, the tax deadline has been extended to this summer to, I'll double check, I believe it's July 15th is the new tax deadline. But yes, tax year 2019, your payment status will be what determines it. And so if you are currently filing your taxes for 2019, the ones that you expected you were going to have to pay by April 15th and now have until July to pay, if you set up direct deposit while filing your taxes, my understanding is that that is how your check should come. So that is a good argument to hurry up and file your taxes if you haven't yet. We don't yet know how the IRS is going to be impacted by this. The federal government is, of course, in no way immune to the coronavirus, and we don't know what's going to happen if large portions of the federal government are impacted. We are beginning to see what happens when our lawmakers are impacted. We know that Senator Rand Paul, who voted against previous coronavirus funding, has himself tested positive for the virus. This happened roughly a day after his father wrote an editorial calling the coronavirus a hoax. Some call that karma. I don't call it that. I just call it part of this pandemic. We are learning from our newsroom that the IRS volunteer tax prep centers for low-income Americans are largely shutting down due to social distancing. So this is more bad news for Americans. The good news is they have more time to file their taxes, but that does mean that it is harder for people to try to get their taxes set up before when they would hope to receive these stimulus bills. All right, we have a question from Barry. He asks, if a coworker's father contracts COVID-19, should employees self-isolate? And the CDC recommends close contacts with someone who tested positive for COVID-19 should monitor their health, that they should call their healthcare provider right away if they develop symptoms suggestive of COVID-19, symptoms such as a fever, a cough, shortness of breath. It's important, if you're experiencing symptoms, please call a healthcare professional. Please don't show up unannounced in person at a healthcare center. The CDC says this includes household members, intimate partners, and caregivers in a non-healthcare setting who may have close contact with a person symptomatic or laboratory-confirmed COVID-19. These people should self-quarantine for 14 days, even if they do not have symptoms. This does not necessarily include coworkers if a colleague's father tests positive, but they should stay in touch with that colleague to see if they develop symptoms or test positive, especially if they do not honor the 14-day self-quarantine period. The best advice that I have seen going around is don't change your behavior to avoid infection. Change your behavior to assume that you have become infected and prevent yourself from being a danger to others. Most people who get this are not in danger, but a significant portion of the population are. And even though the fatality rate for this virus is low, if the infection rate is as high as it could be, we would be looking at a large number of deaths. An analysis released recently by the Imperial College of London said that if allowed to spread unchecked, over 2 million Americans could be killed by the coronavirus. And I'm getting an update on another question that that was asked. For those of you just tuning in, this is NowThis live briefing of the President's Coronavirus Task Force briefing. The President is running roughly half an hour late. I'm going to check his Twitter feed and see if we have an idea of what he's up to. We know that he started the day by tweeting snide comments about Senator Mitt Romney and about Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti. Yesterday, he called for unity, saying that we are all in this together, that we have to put partisanship aside. But today, he has been quick to attack his opponents. An hour ago, shortly, not too long before he was due to come out here, he tweeted, "The lamestream media is the dominant force in trying to get me to keep our country closed as long as possible in the hope that it will be detrimental to my election success. The real people want to get back to work ASAP. We will be stronger than ever before." The facts there are that I believe all people of all parties want to return to normal as soon as possible. But the guidance of virtually all public health officials across the globe is that self-isolation and social distancing is the best step that we can take in the short term to prevent the spread of this disease. If this infection is spread widely, we know that it is possible that over 2 million Americans could be killed by it, and no one of any party wants that to happen. We have more information on what happens to low-income Americans under the current version of the bill. Low-income Americans who have not paid taxes in the past would be required to file a 2019 tax return to get their checks. If they file the return, even if the return shows that they owe no money, if they file the return, my understanding is that makes them eligible. Now, of course, as we've highlighted, the IRS volunteer prep centers that would help people who are not accustomed to filing a return do so for the first time, those prep centers are largely shut down due to social distancing. But people who would normally make too little to file taxes at all can file a return and thereby make themselves eligible for the payments that would be coming under this bill, and I believe that that would make them eligible for the full $1,200. Earlier today, President Trump tweeted about 4 FEMA hospitals that are being set up in New York's Javits Convention Center. That is an example of something going well. That is, while Governor Cuomo had called for that to happen earlier, it is happening, and the Javits Center should soon be set up to care for as many as 1,000 patients. There are likely to be a very high need for hospital treatment in New York. New York City alone has nearly 18,000 confirmed cases. The state has nearly 31,000 confirmed cases. New York City has more confirmed cases than any other individual city in the world. This is due in large part to the high population density of New York City. As Governor Cuomo said this morning, New York's closeness is what made it vulnerable, but it is also the greatest strength of New Yorkers, he said, is our closeness. We're getting questions. An interesting question is coming up. What are cities with large numbers of homeless population doing to address the crisis? I'm going to see if our team can get some information there. That is homeless Americans. Americans experiencing homelessness are at greater risk of many illnesses, and the coronavirus is surely no exception. We're going to see if we can get some specific information on that for you as well. Now, I'm looking out at the shot we have of the White House press briefing room. It is interesting to note the stark difference between the White House briefings and virtually all of the state and local briefings. The reporters in the White House briefing room are seated every other seat, but they are in fact closer together than, well, actually the reporters seem to be roughly 6 feet apart from each other, though not without exception. But every time the coronavirus task force team comes out in front of that podium, they are typically standing inches away from each other. In contrast, when most governors around the nation are holding briefings, they are standing or sitting 6 feet away from their colleagues. Many governors and mayors have been using virtual press briefings, have been taking calls from press rather than being in a room with the press. Social distancing seems to be the best short-term solution that we can offer to avoid the spread of this virus. Here in New York, as in many cities, essential businesses are remaining open. These include groceries and hardware stores. I'll tell you, when I visit my own grocery store, I'm struck that my neighbors apparently do not cook very often. I find that there is a shortage of sandwich fixings and frozen dinners, but there is no shortage of fresh vegetables and potatoes and garlic and tomatoes and zucchinis. And so it seems that in my neighborhood in the East Village of Manhattan, it is possible to cook yourself a very healthy and delicious dinner. Most stores are limiting the number of people who can enter a store at the time to allow for social distancing. And it is nice to notice that many cities have designated liquor stores as essential businesses. So it is possible for people to have their, I believe some people have dubbed them quarantinis. Drinking alone used to be considered a warning sign. Now it's just safe social distancing. So we have a question from Susan, who asks, what if someone thinks they already have the virus and the treatment worked on them? I'm sorry, I'm reading the question from Susan. She says, what if someone thinks they already had the virus and the treatment worked on them for what they did before it was known? Has this been checked into yet? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I will tell you that the CDC said yesterday that they think that it is unlikely that people can become infected a second time. They believe that even though this is a mutating virus, that the mutated forms are likely to be similar enough that people who have fought it off once are at very low risk of getting it again. So if you believe that you have had the virus and have recovered, that is very good news for you. Now, that does not mean that you should not continue to take precautions, especially since you don't know for sure that that's what you had. The World Health Organization says that there is no vaccine and there are no specific antiviral medicines available to prevent or treat COVID-19. Those affected should receive care to relieve the symptoms. People with serious illness should be hospitalized. Most patients recover thanks to supportive care. And again, if you are experiencing symptoms, the key thing is to call a medical professional before simply going to a medical facility. Do not go unannounced to a medical facility. You could be endangering yourself and others. Possible vaccines and some specific drug treatments are under investigation. The president has suggested that a vaccine is very close. The FDA and other health officials suggest that it is more likely as many as 18 months away. But possible vaccines are being tested through clinical trials. The World Health Organization is coordinating efforts to develop vaccines and medicines to prevent and treat COVID-19. But be cautious of anyone saying there is a cure, including the President of the United States. It is important to note the President has made some statements about theories that he has as to what medicines and chemicals could treat the disease. In fact, already there has been a couple in Arizona who, believing that they were following the president's guidelines, ingested fish tank cleaner that contained a chemical that the president had referenced, and the husband of the couple, in fact, died. Do not take so-called cures that have not been approved by the FDA. There are also various fringe figures who have been offering so-called cures. Jim Bakker, the disgraced televangelist, has been offering a silver serum that he has claimed will cure the coronavirus. Alex Jones has offered toothpaste that he claims will kill the coronavirus. These are not factual claims. Be on the lookout for phishing emails, for spam texts. This is a terrible opportunity for people to prey upon people's fears, either to make a buck or make a splash. Turn to your trusted sources of information. At NowThis, we are striving to be one of those sources of information. Look to the guidance of the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization and the NIH. They are striving to present the most up-to-date factual information. We have some answer to the question of how Americans experiencing homelessness may be impacted by this. In Washington, D.C., homeless shelters announced that they would stay open around the clock instead of the usual 12 hours, and emergency measures will allow Mayor Bowser of D.C. to temporarily house families experiencing homelessness for up to 60 days. People experiencing homelessness are exempt from a public health order to shelter in place in 7 Northern California counties, but officials are encouraging them to seek shelter. They will not be arrested for being in public in those counties. San Francisco's Mayor London Breed announced a $5 million emergency fund and public health order earlier this month to help vulnerable populations, including those experiencing homelessness. The money will pay for roving cleaning crews to minimize contagion and support expanded daytime hours at shelters. In the Seattle area, where the first domestic coronavirus case was reported, care providers have been working on social distancing in shelters. Seattle city officials also are funding emergency hotel rooms for those experiencing homelessness. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib on Monday introduced legislation that would provide emergency grants to help those experiencing homelessness and those who work with them to reduce the spread of the coronavirus. Their bill, the Public Health Emergency Shelter Act, would offer $15.5 billion in grants to serve communities experiencing homelessness and to train frontline staff on disease prevention and mitigation, as well as provide hazard pay to those workers and reimburse them for their costs. And I'm also being told that the current stimulus bill has $5 billion in place for community development block grants that would be allocated to provide states and communities with funds to help the most vulnerable, including those experiencing homelessness. Now, the president has just tweeted. He has just tweeted attacking the fake news CNN. He says, "I hear that the fake news CNN just reported that I am isolated in the White House, wondering out loud, when will life return to normal? Does anybody really believe that? There was no leak. They made it up. They are corrupt and fake news. I have been packed all day with meetings. I have no time for stupidity. We are working around the clock to keep America safe." So that is the latest word from the President of the United States, who says that he has no time for stupidity. He did have time to attack Senator Mitt Romney and Stormy Daniels' attorney this morning on Twitter. Those were two of his first tweets of the day. So those attacks were very high on his agenda for today. We are still awaiting him. I've just received an alert on how soon he might come to the briefing room. 2-minute warning. I'm told that the President of the United States is 2 minutes away from entering the briefing room. When he comes out, I will silence my microphone and I will chime in if he says something that someone in our newsroom can provide information to expand upon. I'll try not to be overly intrusive, but if the President says something that we know to be false or that appears to be false or misleading, we will do our best in real time to check it. If you just joined us, this is NowThis live broadcast / fact check of President Trump's coronavirus task force briefing. I am Alan Piper, the senior politics producer for NowThis, and I am supported by an entire remote newsroom of dedicated, intelligent, not fake news, very real news journalists who are in seclusion, working from home, who are part of this effort to keep you informed and to get us all through this current crisis safe. We may have time for one more question before the President comes out. Steve asks, oh, here they come. I'll keep quiet and we'll continue to update you. All right, well, they haven't started speaking yet. Steve, I've got your question. Steve has a question about flatulence, which I will try to answer in a bit, but I'm going to hold the flatulence answer for now because we are expecting the President of the United States imminently. I see that the coronavirus task force members are trying to stand a little bit further apart. They do not appear to be 6 feet apart, but they are at least a few feet apart from each other, which is a change from earlier briefings. It was very striking that the other day when Vice President Pence announced that there was the potential that he had been exposed and that he would be taking a coronavirus test, he was standing 6 inches away from the President of the United States. There have been legitimate concerns raised as to whether Vice President Pence and President Trump really should be in the room at the same time. During the most unsure hours following the 9/11 attacks, specifically President Bush and Vice President Cheney made a point to never be in the same physical location as a matter of national security. And it is striking and somewhat surprising that the President and Vice President are spending so much time physically together. And here is the President of the United States. Most unsure hours following the 9/11 attacks, specifically President Bush and Vice President Cheney made a point to never be in the
sacrifices required to overcome this terrible threat. More aggressively, we commit to social distancing, so important. Social distancing, such an important phrase, and we do it right now. The more lives we can save, and the sooner we can eventually get people back to work, back to school, and back to normal. And there are large sections of our country probably can go back much sooner than other sections. And we're obviously looking at that also. People are asking, is that an alternative? I say absolutely it is an alternative. I have now approved major disaster declarations for New York, California, Washington, Iowa, Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. That has great significance, as you know, and legal significance. We're in a constant grouping, and I can say this, we have a large grouping of people that does nothing but communicate with the various officials, including we've been spending a lot of time with New York officials because that really is by far the hottest spot.
Now, the president has named 3 states that have formally been declared coronavirus disaster areas. It is important to note that those states have not received the disaster unemployment assistance that they expected to follow that designation.
He thinks we're using very appropriately the Defense Production Act, and we're using it where needed. It's a great point of leverage. It's a great negotiating tool. But I will tell you, there's tremendous spirit from people and tremendous spirit with respect to these companies. And I don't have to use it very much at all. They want to do it. As you know, General Motors is involved, Ford's involved, 3M's involved, others are involved, and they're all working very hard to produce all different products.
So the president is talking about the use of the Defense Production Act. He's talking about not having to use it. The Defense Production Act would allow him to direct industries to produce the various gear that is currently needed by all states. A shortage of ventilators and personal protective gear poses a challenge for places hit by COVID-19. In theory, Trump could use the Defense Production Act to compel manufacturers to fill the gaps, but this window of opportunity may be closing too quickly. And in practice, repurposing an auto factory into a medical respirator facility could take months, longer than the 2 to 3 weeks that Governor Cuomo has said would be needed to help New York.
There's some very large testings throughout the country. I told you yesterday that in South Korea, and this is not a knock in any way, because I just spoke with President Moon. We had a very good conversation about numerous other things, but they've done a very good job in testing. But we now are doing more testing than anybody by far. We do more in 8 days than they do in 8 weeks, and we go up on a daily basis exponentially. So it's really good. By the way, while I'm on it, I also spoke with Prime Minister Abe of Japan last night, and I congratulated him on a wise choice. I think it's going to be a fantastic Olympics, 2021. I think it's going to be a fantastic Olympics. It was the absolute right decision to delay it for a full year and now have a full, beautiful Olympics. It's going to be very important because it's probably the first time, maybe ever, or certainly in a long time, that it was on a odd year. It's always on an even year, they tell me. But he's going to have a fantastic success, and now they'll have even more time. He didn't need any more time. Everything was perfectly ready. What a job they've done. But Japan, I want to congratulate Japan, the IOC, and Prime Minister Abe on a great decision. I think it's going to be a fantastic Olympics. I told him I'll be there. I'll be there. As we fight to protect American lives, we're also protecting American livelihoods. Democrats and Republicans in the Senate are very close to passing an emergency relief bill for American workers, families, and businesses. This legislation, in addition to the 2 bills I signed this month, that includes, as you know, sick leave, and we have all sorts of things in for the workers, for families, but we have a tremendous paid sick leave provision for workers at no cost at all to the employers. And that's a big thing, no cost to the employers. We want to get everybody back working. Together, this $2.2 trillion legislative package is bigger than anything, I believe, ever passed in Congress. Perhaps, relatively speaking, if you go back, look during the FDR New Deal days, there was something that if you time value it, you could say it was bigger. I don't know. But this is certainly, in terms of dollars, by far and away the biggest ever done. And that's a tremendous thing because a lot of this money goes to jobs, and families. The Senate.
It is worth just jumping in to say that the president is actually completely accurate here. This would be the biggest relief package ever passed.
The workers, that's what we want. We want them to keep their workers and pay their workers. This will help businesses keep workers in the payroll and allow our economy to quickly accelerate as soon as we defeat the virus. $300 billion in direct cash payments will be available for every American citizen earning less than $99,000 per year. That would be $3,400 very quickly for the typical family of four. Nothing like that's ever been done in our country. Up to $250 billion in expanded unemployment benefits. The average worker who has lost his or her job will receive 100% of their salary for up to 4 full months. Unlike normal unemployment benefits, independent contractors and the self-employed will be eligible. So you have independent contractors and self-employed people will be eligible for this. Over $100 billion to support the heroic work of our doctors, nurses, and hospitals. They've been incredible. $45 billion for disaster relief fund. So we are setting up a fund of $45 billion for disaster relief. That's more than doubling the amount available to support my national emergency and disaster declarations. It's a doubling up. $27 billion to build up the strategic national stockpile with critical supplies, including masks, respirators, pharmaceuticals, and everything you can imagine, because it was very depleted, like our military was depleted. Now we have a brand new military. Never had a military like this. We have equipment either coming or it's already come. For the most part, it's already come, but we have a lot of things that will soon be coming. Planes, missiles, rockets, lots of things. But the stockpile was very depleted, like everything else. This will also include significant funding for the development of vaccines on top of the $8 billion we approved several weeks ago. Over $500 billion in support for the hardest hit industries, with a ban on corporate stock buybacks, which is something I insisted on. And frankly, I tell you, the Republicans wanted that, and the Democrats wanted that. We want them to use the money for the companies and the planes or whatever they may be helping to get over this rough patch. And I don't think it's going to end up being such a rough patch. I think it's going to, when we open, especially if we can open it, the sooner the better, it's going to open up like a rocket ship. I think it's going to go very good and very quickly. And you're going to have some tough new limits on executive compensation also. They need the money. They're going to have to sort of just make things work, because we're interested in the workers, the jobs. And we're interested in the companies, because that's really what fuels the workers in those great jobs. And we also have $16 billion in funding for the purchase of personal protective equipment. You know about that, such as masks and respirators, through the strategic national stockpile. I encourage the House to pass this vital legislation and send the bill to my desk for signature without delay. I will sign it immediately. We will have a signing, and it'll be a great signing and a great day for the American worker and for American families, and frankly for American companies, some of which were having the best years they've ever had these last few years, and then a little bit less than a month ago, they went into a position that they haven't seen because of the hidden enemy, the virus. Earlier today, I spoke to the leaders of many of America's amazing nonprofit organizations. I thank them for their unwavering devotion to American people, to American families, to our nation. And they have been fantastic. They've been collecting supplies, distributing food, supporting healthcare workers, caring for vulnerable workers and families. I encourage them to continue to do it. But I'll tell you, the nonprofits have been fantastic. They've been great. They're great people, actually. I know a lot of them. Finally, I want to provide a brief update on the critical supplies. Through FEMA, the federal government has delivered or is in the process of shipping 9.4 million N95 respirators. Think of that, 9.4 million. 20 million surgical masks, and we have others that we think are going to be delivered pretty quickly. The whole world, you know, it's not just us, it's not just the states. The whole world is trying to get these things, so in competition with many, many countries. I believe today you broke the 150 mark for the virus. We have 150 countries, over 150 countries where you have this virus. And nobody would ever believe a thing like that's possible. Nobody could have ever seen something like this coming. But now we know, and we know it can happen and happen again. And if it does, somebody's going to be very well prepared because of what we've learned and how we've done. It's been incredible how we've done. Remember, there's more tests than anybody by far. And the news, the report.
Now, it is worth noting with those FEMA supplies that are being sent out, this is considerably later than most states have been asking for it. There has been a shortage of these supplies in the states hardest hit, and the president had initially told governors that it was their responsibility to track it down on their own, which led to states bidding against each other, price wars, and the cost of items such as an N95 mask, which usually costs a few cents. Governor Cuomo recently said that the state of New York was needing to pay $7 per mask because of the competition between other states, and in some instances even competition with the federal government rather than receiving these supplies from the government. These new directives from FEMA seem to be resolving some of that concern, but it is coming far later than governors had asked for it.
They don't, maybe they do, I don't know. All I can tell you is they're talented people. They work very hard. In Maryland, a 7-year-old boy used his own birthday money to buy meals for dozens of senior citizens. In Nevada, a college student recruited 90 of her friends to help deliver groceries and supplies to the most vulnerable. This is happening all over the country, thousands and thousands of instances. I could stand up here all day and tell you about other things. In Minnesota, hundreds of medical students have volunteered to provide child care for hospital workers, helping to keep our doctors and nurses on the front lines, fighting to save lives. These inspiring Americans remind us that we all have a role to play in winning this great national battle, and it's really a worldwide battle. We're dealing with other nations.
Now, the president makes an important point. It is true that the way that people have come together has been remarkable and inspiring, but in so many of these instances, communities are coming together to fill in the gaps that have been created by a lack of a federal response until very recently.
Here's the guy, and he loves our country, and he's been dealing with both sides, Republican and Democrats. He sort of lived over in that beautiful building. It's a very beautiful building. To me, one of the most beautiful buildings actually in the world, and he's gotten to know it, Steve, very well. So if we could have a little update, Steve, would be fantastic as to how we're doing and what it's looking like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And first, let me say, I would like to thank Mitch McConnell for his leadership, and I'd also like to thank Chuck Schumer for the enormous bipartisan support we had on this. Many senators, both Republicans and Democrats, that worked tirelessly over the last 5 days on all the task force. As the President said, I got to live in the LBJ room for the last 5 days, and we couldn't be more pleased with the unprecedented response from the Senate to protect American workers and American business in this situation. The President has outlined many of these, but let me just quickly go through them. Again, small business retention loans. This will cover roughly 50% of the private payroll in small businesses, where we will immediately make loans that will supply 8 weeks of salaries as long as they keep workers employed and overhead. And those loans will be forgiven at the end of the period as long as they keep workers employed. These are SBA loans, but the Treasury will be issuing new regulations authorizing almost every single FDIC-insured bank to make these. I expect by the end of next week, we will have a very simple process where these can be made and dispersed in the same day. So this will be a very simple system to get money into small business hands. For companies that don't qualify that, we have a economic program of tax incentives to retain workers. And as the President said, we have enhanced unemployment insurance for people who don't fit into these two programs that will be administered through the states. We also have economic impact payments. These will be within the next 3 weeks, direct payments into most people's deposit accounts. And for those that don't have it, we will be having the checks in the mail.
Now, again, the New York Times has reported that those who do not have direct deposit set up with the IRS could be waiting months for these checks.
Programs that will create up to an additional $4 trillion, if needed, to support American business and American workers in an unprecedented way. And then finally, the President mentioned $100 billion to hospitals and $150 billion to states that have specific coronavirus expenses, as well as many additional things. Mr. President, I especially want to thank you and the Vice President. You are constantly available.
Now, this $150 billion to states, it's important to note that this is, according to Governor Cuomo's report, this is being divided fairly evenly between states, which means that those states who are most in need are not necessarily receiving more. And Governor Cuomo has said that he believes that the state of New York is only going to get $3.8 billion, which will not go very far to cover the need that he says of $15 billion.
Question, yes.
Do you think this bill will keep the economy afloat?
Hopefully a long time. We'll see. If we have to go back, we have to go back. We're going to take care of the American worker. We're going to take care of these companies that fuel this country and make the country great. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. But we think
I would say we've anticipated 3 months. Hopefully we won't need this for 3 months. Hopefully this war will be won quicker. But we expect that this is a significant amount of money, if needed, to cover the economy.
And don't forget, a lot of this is going to be to keep companies that are very strong, AAA-rated companies previously, to keep them going. And it's going to be in the form of loans, so the money's going to come back. A lot of this money's coming back.
Separately, let me ask you about something you said yesterday. You said we should never be reliant on a foreign country for the means of our own survival.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I've been saying that for a long time. Well, we're reliant on many countries where we give up our supply chains, we give up our factories, we give up our production facilities, and we can buy it someplace else for a little bit lower price. But it's really costing us more when that happens because we lose jobs, we lose everything, and we lose our independence, and we can't let that happen. So we'll be making some changes. We have been making those changes.
Is there an executive order to basically ban the export of medical equipment?
I don't know that we'll need that, but I think it's happening by itself. I think a lot of things are happening. Well, some people, we make the best medical equipment in the world, and you have some people like the European Union, they don't take it because they have specifications that don't allow our equipment in because it's designed in a different way. Even though it's a better way, it's designed. They're all playing games against us, okay? They've been playing games against us for years, and no president has ever done anything about it. But the European Union, you look at medical equipment, we make the best medical equipment in the world, but we can't sell it because we're not appropriately. And yet we take their medical equipment in our country. We're changing things, Steve. All this is changing. But they have specifications so that our equipment, designed specifically so that our equipment can't come into their countries. It's a very terrible thing that's happened to our country. And let me tell you, some of the people that took the biggest advantage of us are allies. You know, we talk about allies. They took advantage of us in many ways, but financially as well as even militarily. When you look at, if you look at NATO, the abuse that was given to our country on NATO, where they wouldn't pay. And we were paying for everybody. We're paying. Now, because of me, they're paying a lot. Now they've paid $135 billion more. And then ultimately, Secretary General Stoltenberg, who I think what you would say is maybe my biggest fan, we got him to pay an additional $400 billion other countries. And but you know that, and then there's the trade. They make it almost impossible for us to have a fair deal. They know this. They know I'm just waiting. We have all the advantages, by the way. It's going to be easy when I decide to do it. But this isn't the right time to do it. But we've been treated very, very unfairly by the European Union.
Mr. President, 4 Republican senators have indicated that the extra $600 for unemployment insurance may encourage workers to leave their jobs, even though you can only collect unemployment.
I'm going to just jump in there. The president said a lot of very confusing things regarding exporting medical equipment to other countries. The EU's medical device market is the world's second largest, and the United States is its top supplier, according to the U.S. International Trade Commission. So it's really unclear what the president could be referring to when he says the EU is preventing American medical equipment from being imported.
Money out quickly in a fair way, so we used $600 across the board. And I don't think it'll create incentives. Most Americans, what they want to keep their jobs. And I said for 50% of these businesses, they will have the businesses keep those jobs. So this was, our number one issue was how do we make sure that American workers who needed to keep getting paid, this is no fault of their own, that businesses have been shut down. The president and vice president wanted to make sure those hardworking Americans got money, and this was the most efficient way of doing it.
Senators that you spoke with, are they in agreement now?
I'm not going to comment on the specifics of where they are, but I would say, our expectation is this bill passes tonight and gets to the House tomorrow, and they pass it. We need to get this money into the American economy and American workers. That's the importance of this.
The one good thing when you think about that, people are going to get actually more money, but we don't want to give a disincentive. But they have been talking about that. It's a good question, actually. Yes, ma'am, please.
Yes, thank you. The family of, on another subject, the family of retired FBI agent Ron.
And I just want to jump in. The president was again harping on this idea of unpaid NATO bills. This is something that has been repeatedly debunked. This has been said to be false. NATO members did make a commitment 4 years ago to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024, and but the idea that there are somehow dues, that it's some sort of a club, this mostly seems to be a made-up view by President Trump.
He's been sick for a long time, and he had some rough problems prior to his detainment or capture, and we feel terribly for the family. But
Do you accept that he is dead?
no, I don't accept that he's dead. I don't accept it. I mean, I'm telling you, it's not looking great, but I won't accept that he's dead. They haven't told us that he's dead, but a lot of people are thinking that that is the case. Feel badly about it.
Mr. President, you tweeted earlier linking the closing of the country to your election success in November. Is this Easter timeline based on your political interests?
What do you mean
Because
by my election success? No.
you tweeted, you said that the media wants the country to remain closed to hurt your odds
No,
of
I
being
think the
reelected.
media, the media would like to see me do poorly in the election. I think
Lawmakers and economists on both sides of the aisle have said that reopening the country by Easter is not a good idea. What is that plan based on?
just so you understand, are you ready? I think there are certain people that would like it not to open so quickly. I think there are certain people that would like it to do financially poorly because they think that would be very good as far as defeating me at the polls. And I don't know if that's so, but I do think it's so that there are people in your profession that would like that to happen. I think it's very clear. I think it's very clear that there are people in your profession that write fake news. You do. She does. There are people in your profession that write fake news. They would love to see me for whatever reason because we've done one hell of a job. Nobody's done the job that we've done. And it's lucky that you have this group here right now for this problem, or you wouldn't even have a country left. Okay, go ahead, sir.
The president is again attacking journalists, accusing people in the White House press briefing room of writing fake news. News that the president dislikes is not fake simply because he dislikes it. The people in this room are some of the most respected journalists in America.
Is within 3 weeks, we will have direct payments out where we have depository information, and we're looking to get a lot more information, and we have procedures to do that. So 3 weeks for that, and I would say the end of next week, we want all the banks to be able to originate loans same day.
Secretary Mnuchin is saying that the direct payments will be coming by direct deposit within 3 weeks, but the New York Times has reported for those who do not have direct deposit with the IRS and will be awaiting physical checks, those could take months.
COVID-19 is a zoonotic that was transferred to humans in trade of exotic animals.
Yeah, I don't know that that subject's going to come up. There is a lot of talk that that's how this all happened, came out of China, and they say that's how it happened in China. So it's something maybe will be talked about, but it's not the top of my list.
Yes,
I think we're going to have a very good conference tomorrow.
Also, Dr. Ashish Shah, who's the head of Harvard's Global Health Institute, says that the key to getting this economy open as soon as possible is to test everyone who needs testing so we can quarantine all infected individuals and allow everyone else to go back to work immediately. Would you subscribe to that strategy?
No, but we have tested more than anybody. I saw him.
And if not, how many deaths are acceptable?
Yeah. How many? None. Okay. How many deaths are acceptable to me? None. Okay, none. If that's your question. Look, I saw him. I saw his statement. We have tested by far more than anybody. We're testing more than anybody right now. There's nobody even close. And our tests are the best tests. They're the most accurate tests. But if you're saying we're going to test 350 million people, I watched his statement. I disagree with it. We can go to certain states. I could name them now, but I'm not going to do that. But we can go to certain states right now that have virtually no problem or a very small problem.
The states where there is virtually no reported cases of coronavirus are not coincidentally the states with the least amount of testing. One of the reasons that New York has such a high rate is not only the fact that it has more cases, but that it is testing more aggressively than any other state. The president in this briefing has repeatedly suggested that we've done a better job of testing than other nations have. The experts in the field say the reverse. We spoke to Dr. Ashish Jha of Harvard's Global Health Institute just this week. He said that we have had a much worse response than Iran, than Italy, than China and South Korea, and that this is an unmitigated disaster. That is the assessment from the one of the top minds at the Harvard School of Public Health.
Come a long way from an obsolete, broken system that I inherited. We have now tested with the best test far more than anybody else. And when I say anybody else, I'm talking about other countries. No country is even close. They came out with a statistic
When the president says that we have tested more than any other country and no country is close, he is being blatantly misleading. We have tested far fewer people per capita than most nations. South Korea, which had its first case of coronavirus the same day as the U.S., has tested 6 times more people per capita than the U.S. The president was also talking about what number of deaths would be acceptable. He said that no deaths would be acceptable. It is worth noting that 900 have died in the U.S. as of today.
The G20 countries to do for more resources, for a coordinated stimulus package, ban on tariffs, waive on sanctions to try to prevent what they call an apocalyptic pandemic. Would you consider those measures? And
With respect to what?
On tariffs, and also related also to waive tariffs, and also
Look, we have strong
sanctions.
borders. Yeah.
And would you consider to join this global effort?
So before I came here, we weren't into borders. We had a country, people could come in. We had a whole different deal. Now we're up to almost 164 miles. Think of that, 164 miles of wall, big, beautiful wall. And in those areas, it's very, very tough to come in. We've been very tough on the borders. I mean,
The president is making a false statement about the amount of new wall that has built. I'm going to get the number for you that is correct. He's also making a false statement when he says that more people were coming in. Actually, the number of people coming in has increased somewhat under his administration, in part from panic that his policies have caused. And as it relates to the coronavirus pandemic, it's also important to note this is not something coming in across the southern border. Mexico has only about 400 cases of coronavirus versus the 62,000 here in the U.S.
I knew it was 35 million, and we actually took off 10. But I'm a fan of that, although I haven't spent time there because I'm far too busy. I'd love to go there evenings, but I'm too busy.
All right. As of last month, by the way, we can confirm from Customs and Border Patrol that all but 1 mile of this supposed 100 miles that the president is touting is merely replacement of existing fencing. There is only 1 new mile of so-called border wall.
I believe that we've had a very good back and forth, and I say that with respect to Chuck Schumer. I spoke to him a number of times, but, you know, they had requests also. So that was a request. There were 35, as you know, and it came down to 25. We got it down to 25. We agreed. I said, that's a lousy soundbite. That's not a good soundbite, but that's the way life works. With that being said, the Kennedy Center, they do a beautiful job, an incredible job. David Rubenstein does a fantastic job. He's very much involved, and he puts up a lot of money, and he does things that a lot of people wouldn't be able to do or do. But they've been essentially closed. They have tremendous deficits that are built up. I mean, this thing has been devastating to it. So I didn't have a big problem with it. But this was a request from the Democrats because of the fact that they have a facility that's essentially closed up.
Yes,
Another question, sir.
In other words, you couldn't go there if you wanted to. If I wanted to go there tonight to look at Romeo and Juliet, I'd love to see Romeo and Juliet tonight, right? You know what would happen? They say, sorry, 250 people or 50 people, whatever it might be down to. Go ahead.
And then earlier today, Senator Marco Rubio.
FYI, there was not a planned performance of Romeo and Juliet at the Kennedy Center tonight anyway. That is not a thing that was going to happen that has been preempted by the crisis.
There were several red flags in his past with respect to his relationship with China. Do you agree? Do you think the World Health Organization showed favoritism? And then once all the dust settles, do you think that the United States should re-explore its relationship with the World Health Organization?
Well, I think there is a lot of, certainly a lot of talk that has been very unfair. I think that a lot of people feel that it's been very unfair. It's been very much sided with China, and a lot of people are not happy about it. At the same time, Dr. Fauci and myself and other people, there are people on there that we like and we know. A lot of, I think your friends are on there, a lot of good people, a lot of good professionals. I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear if you'd like to talk about the World WHO. But the fact is that I have heard for years that that is very much biased toward China. So I don't know. Doctor, you want me to get you into this political mess?
No, I don't want you to do that, but I will. Tedros is really an outstanding person. I've known him from the time that he was the Minister of Health of Ethiopia. I mean, obviously, over the years, anyone who says that the WHO has not had problems has not been watching the WHO. But I think under his leadership, they've done very well. He has been all over this. I was on the phone with him a few hours ago leading a WHO call.
Praising China's transparency, sir?
No, I'm not talking about China. You asked me about Tedros.
World Health Organization praising China for its transparency and leadership on their response to the pandemic?
You know, I can't comment on that because, I mean, I don't have any viewpoint into it. I mean, I don't even know what your question is.
Can I follow up on that phone call, please?
Welcome to the group. You know, let me just tell you, I've heard that for years. I spoke to him yesterday. Seems fine to me. I don't know. But we're the ones that gave the great response, and we're the ones that kept China out of here. And if we didn't do it, you'd have thousands and thousands of people would have died, that are now living and happy. If I didn't do that early, call on China, and nobody wanted that to happen. Everybody thought it was just unnecessary to do it. And if we didn't do that, thousands and thousands of people would have died, more than.
An important thing to note, the president touts his closing of travel from China. What that did was buy time, and the problem is that basically nothing was done during that time to prevent the spread of the disease. And that, again, when we compare the response of South Korea to the U.S., which was on an identical timeline, we can see how the time that was bought by closing travel from China was squandered.
I'll be speaking with Tony. I'll be speaking with Deborah. I'll be speaking with some of the people that they like and respect, and they're going to bring along with them. We'll be speaking to Vice President Mike Pence and Steve, and we'll be speaking to everybody. I'm not going to do anything rash or hastily. I don't do that. But the country wants to get back to work.
I do have to fact check that the president frequently does things that are rash and hasty.
Down for 2 years. We can't do that. It's not our country. So we're going to be talking, and it could be we'll do sections of our country. There's big sections of our country that are very, little affected by what's taken place. Then there are other sections that are very heavily affected. So there's a big difference. But no.
The president is drawing a false comparison between opening the country for business within a couple weeks and keeping it closed for, quote, 2 years. No one is suggesting that the country needs to be shut down for 2 years. The FDA suggests that a vaccine may be available within 18 months. No one is talking about a 2-year period, except for the president.
They can walk around hugging and kissing each other in the office when they come back, even though they may feel like it. They're going to wash their hands more than they've ever done. They're going to do all the things you're supposed to do. But Steve, you know what? It's time. People want to get back to work. I get it from both sides, in all fairness. And maybe it's a combination of both. Tony said before, a combination of both is sometimes very good. But
It's been called to my attention that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin just coughed into his hand right behind the president.
Happens, but it'll be an interesting period of time. I'd like to get our country back. I have tremendous numbers of people wanting to go back. You have store owners where the store is sitting there. They don't know what's happening. They got to get back. You have businesses that are going to be closed. The longer we stay out, the longer we do it. We want to go quickly. The longer we stay out, the harder it is to bring this incredible. We were having the most successful years that we've ever had in the history of our country. You saw what happened yesterday with the stocks, and today they're up. I'm telling you, if Steve gets the deal done, the incredible incentive is going to take care of people. It's going to take care of our workers. It's going to take care of companies that employ all these workers, small and big. By the way, I would say we spend more time on the small companies, Steve, than we did on the big companies. People ask about that. We spend more time thinking about the small businesses than the...
Now, the president is again repeating the idea that the economy until recently was the greatest in history. The economy has been relatively strong until recently, but not the highest in history, and there were more jobs created in Obama's last 3 years than in Trump's first 3 years.
A question for you on the GPA.
Well, thank you all. A report on today's action by the White House Coronavirus Task Force. The President and our entire team continue to be inspired by the way people all across this country are putting into practice 15 days to slow the spread. We are 10 days into the 15 days. And let me say again to every American, if you're in here,
the Vice President seems to be signaling that this social distancing should end within the next 5 days. None of the analyses that have been publicly discussed modeling the spread of the coronavirus in the U.S. suggest that there will be a resolution of this pandemic anywhere near the next 5 days.
Today, because we truly do believe that, as millions of Americans have done and will continue to do, that we can significantly impact the rate of growth in this epidemic in our country. We can spare Americans from exposure to the coronavirus, and we can save lives. And so on behalf of the President and our entire task force, I want to say thank you to the American people. Thank you for your cooperation. Thank you for embracing the principles in the 15 days to slow the spread. We heard about that cooperation today in a series of conference calls. We spoke with equipment manufacturers who are stepping forward as never before to assist us in developing the medical equipment that is essential, whether it be masks or other medical supplies or ventilators. FEMA reported to our task force today that hundreds of companies have stepped forward to be involved in the supply chain, and we are vetting nearly 70 of those countries for specific repurposing of their manufacturing to produce everything from masks to gloves to gowns and, of course, to ventilators. We also had a very productive call with Secretary Betsy DeVos with education leaders from around the country today. And let me say on behalf of the President and a grateful nation, thank you to all of our teachers, many of whom are now home, teaching children from afar, even in many cases while they have their own kids home from school. You are truly heroes, and the Department of Education, as well as your State Department of Education, are grateful to each and every one of you who find yourselves educating out of home. And the Department of Education has a helpful website on coronavirus recommendations, ed.gov/coronavirus. And as we mentioned before, Secretary Betsy DeVos and Secretary Sonny Perdue will be joining us at this podium on Friday to speak about distance learning recommendations that have been made not just for secondary or for college education, but also for K through 12 education. We're opening up avenues, creating new flexibility so that not only college students can continue to be involved in learning from afar, but children K through 12 can do the same. Secretary Perdue will also be here to talk about the food lunch program and free and reduced lunches. Today, the President and I also spoke to over 150 CEOs of the top nonprofit organizations in the country. We thanked them for their ongoing work, supplying the needs not only of people impacted by the coronavirus, but the most vulnerable among us in our communities. Organizations like Red Cross, the Salvation Army, Feeding America are all still working every day. And we promise to urge every American, if you have the means and have the ability, continue to be generous to nonprofit organizations that are helping those most in need in your community. The President marshaled a whole of government approach. That means working with our governors today. The President and I were in direct contact with governors of New York, California, Washington State, New Jersey, Michigan, and others. And we continue to be inspired and impressed by the leadership the governors are providing in their states, making tough choices, leading their states, and the President and I are truly grateful. The task force made a recommendation, and FEMA has assembled a team to provide technical assistance to the state of New York, and that team was welcomed by Governor Cuomo. Will be arriving on the ground there very soon, along with all the other resources that the President recently announced would be flowing to New York and to Washington State and to California. In my conversation with Governor Gavin Newsom of California, I was pleased to speak to him and hear that our FEMA team is literally at the table with the state of California's team, working to meet their supply needs, working to work on capacity. And I want people to know in the states that are most impacted by the coronavirus that we are with you. We're going to stay with you. We're going to continue to work around the clock to make sure your courageous healthcare workers, your health systems, and your state governments have the resources to support your response. On the subject of testing, Dr. Birx will reflect on what the data is showing in just a moment. Not including local labs and hospitals, we are at 432,000 tests completed. And we're pleased to see that there are literally drive-through and community sites around the country, and the U.S. Public Health Service is assisting states in standing those up each and every day.
These new testing numbers are impressive, but they are very late. And again, comparing the U.S. response to South Korea's response, which had its first case of coronavirus on the same day, South Korea has tested roughly 6 times more people per capita than the U.S., which has played a large role in that country's greater ability to contain the virus.
Single day. On the subject of supplies, before the end of the week, we'll talk a bit more, as the President did moments ago, about the supply chain. I was at FEMA last night and literally saw a room full of people with laptops and cell phones. We are literally leaving no stone unturned, as I told governors today, to find medical supplies, whether it be masks or gowns or gloves or ventilators.
Well, they are leaving some stones unturned, because under the Defense Production Act, the President could be directing all industries to be producing these items now, and not merely calling upon them to do it on a voluntary basis. Governor Cuomo had pointed out that any company that can make apparel, any clothing company, could be creating masks and gowns for hospitals and would probably be happy to do so, but they need to be called upon to do so by the President, and given the resources that would be available to shift over that production as the Defense Production Act allows.
Around the country and encouraging their support. With that, let me last say again, there's nothing more important for the American people to do to slow the spread than to heed your state and local guidance in areas impacted by the coronavirus, and for everyone else to put into practice the 15 days to slow the spread. Dr. Fauci will reflect on the importance of mitigation and the impact that we believe that it is having around the country. But it is, people ask me from time to time, what can I do? And I say from my heart to every American, this is what you can do. Not just to protect your own health and that of your family, but no American wants to inadvertently spread the coronavirus, particularly to those that may be vulnerable to serious health consequences. Remember that the risk of serious illness to the average American remains low. I mean, the vast majority of people that contract the coronavirus will have mild symptoms to flu-like symptoms and will recover. But for seniors with serious underlying health conditions or with people with immunodeficiencies, everyone needs to practice the principles of 15 days to slow the spread. The President announced this week that we are looking forward to the
this artificial timeline of 15 days, which would be up within 5 days, has been highlighted again. And I do just want to reiterate that public health officials do not see this as a sufficient timeline. The director of Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security said, quote, "To be a week into these restrictions and already be talking about abandoning them is irresponsible and dangerous. Removing restrictions now would allow the virus to spread widely, rapidly, terribly, and could kill potentially millions in the year ahead with huge social and economic impact."
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you all for listening to us talk to the American people. We've been watching the testing results. It's very critical to us. It's very critical to be looking at that very carefully. Let me tell you two things that are going on in parallel. Our system to look at flu-like illnesses is still up and running in county after county and state after state. And why is that important? For those of you who've been following the flu epidemic this year, you'll remember we had flu A, then we had another peak of flu B, and those systems that are in every single state and local government is the platform where we can see whether there's any increase in flu-like illnesses. So if you have very few cases in your state and in your counties, maintain your flu surveillance system that you work closely with the CDC on, and look for changes in your slope of new flu-like illnesses. And there are enough test kits, and there's particularly enough of the CDC test kit where we started that runs on your flu surveillance platform to be constantly surveilling what those flu-like illnesses are in our states and counties that have very low number of cases. We have counties still with 0 to 1 cases, but they can participate in the surveillance that we need to have out there now by using their flu-like surveillance system, and we thank all of the states who have that up and running. If you go to cdc.gov and go to flu surveillance, you can see state by state, and you can be looking at those curves with us. It's what we're looking at day by day, in addition to the testing results that are coming in. For the testing results, still, there's 4 counties that constitute the majority of both the current cases and new cases. I think you know those are New York City, Westchester, New York, Suffolk, and Nassau County. Those are the 4 counties, all associated with New York and the New York metro area. There's a few counties in New Jersey, but this is still where 56% of the cases are and 56% of the new cases. It's very important that people look at the number of new cases per day. Remember, we told you it was going to take us a while to work through the testing backlog. I think we're close to working through the testing backlog so that you can interpret the number of cases per day, and you will see in New York City that the number of cases per day has been relatively constant over the last 3 days. Those are the number of new cases per day. This is a real call to every person in New York City and the New York metro area to continue every one of these 15 days to slow the spread, and to do that part of it at the same time that they're following the mayor's and governor's piece. Yesterday, we talked about people that may have left the metro area that were residents of the metro area that may have gone to secondary homes or other places to reside. And we've asked all of them to carefully monitor their temperatures and self-isolate from the communities where they went, just to ensure their own health and the health of their communities while people move around the country. Finally, why this is so important. It's very important to me personally because my grandmother, for 88 years, lived with the fact that she was the one at age 11 who brought home flu to her mother, named Leah, for which I am named, when her mother had just delivered. And her mother succumbed to the great 1918 flu. She never forgot that she was the child that was in school that innocently brought that flu home. This is why we keep saying to every American, you have a role to protect each and every person that you interact with. We have a role to protect one another. It's why we are social distancing and you are social distancing. But to every American out there, when you are protecting yourself, you're protecting others. And if you inadvertently, I know, brought this virus home to someone with a pre-existing condition, I can tell you my grandmother lived with that for 88 years. So this is what we're trying. This is the message that's important to everybody. This is not a theoretic. This is a reality. You can see the number of deaths that are occurring. We all have a role in preventing them. So thank you for the work that you do to get our message out to others, to really ensure that every American understands how important their role is as we move through these next 5 days, to not let up for an instant. I hear some reports that someone said, oh, well, the new cases in New York are increasing or the hospitalizations are increasing. The number of new cases over the last 3 days have been consistent, but not rising any more than a consistent day-over-day rise. You will see hospital cases continue to increase because they are a reflection of what happened 1 to 2 weeks ago before the full mitigation efforts were put into place. So each person in every place, no matter what county, what community, what state, can work with us to ensure that we prevent the spread of this virus to others. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I just want to spend a couple of minutes telling you a little bit about some information that I got on our weekly call that we have at least once a week with the WHO, which is led by Dr. Tedros and Mike Ryan, who's the point man there, to give us some information. And in that regard, I want to apologize for my curt response to you when you asked me about the China deal, because I shouldn't have done that. That's not my style. But what I really wanted to say is that my job is that I'm a scientist, I'm a physician, and I'm a public health person, and I don't like to get involved in that stuff. So anyway, getting back to the WHO. So we learned some really interesting information, because obviously the other countries like China and others had been hit prior than we did. One of the things that was striking to me, and I just throw it out because it's something that we will face. We're not facing it now, but we will face. Our Chinese colleagues are very concerned because they went through the entire cycle of the curve to come down. And they have very, very few cases. But what they're starting to see as they're relaxing the constraints on travel, that they're getting imported cases. And they wanted to warn us that when we get successful, make sure you very carefully examine how you're going to release the constraints on inputs. So I know we're going to be successful in putting this under control, but I think we're going to have to remember we don't want to import cases in. That's the first thing for today. The second thing that was important is that it was something that Dr. Birx mentioned. And that is, when you look at the inflection of the curves, we now have multiple different countries that have gone through various phases of their individual outbreaks. And you could learn something from them about where you are in your own outbreak. For example, when China went up, what happened is they just didn't turn around. They went from going to, I'll just take an arbitrary number, 500 new cases a day. The next day it was 1,000 cases, then 1,500, and then 2,000. But once the number of new cases each day starts to flatten out, that's when you get to that point where the inflection goes down. So what things we want to look for, the things that Dr. Birx had mentioned. That doesn't mean you declare victory when it does that, but you know you're at least on the way to where you want to go. And I think that's really very important. The third and final thing that I think gets back to the question that many of you in the audience have asked of us is about, would this possibly become a seasonal cyclic thing? And I've always indicated to you that I think it very well might. And the reason I say that is that what we're starting to see now in the Southern Hemisphere, in Southern Africa, and in the Southern Hemisphere countries is that we're having cases that are appearing as they go into their winter season. And if, in fact, they have a substantial outbreak, it will be inevitable that we need to be prepared that we'll get a cycle around the second time. What does that mean for us in what we're doing? It totally emphasizes the need to do what we're doing in developing a vaccine, testing it quickly, and trying to get it ready so that we'll have a vaccine available for that next cycle. In addition, to do the randomized controlled trials of drugs so that we will have a menu of drugs that we have shown to be effective and shown to be safe. Because I know we'll be successful in putting this down now, but we really need to be prepared for another cycle. And what we're doing, I believe, will prepare us well. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. We'll take a few questions, please.
Mr. Vice President, on ventilators, some really important reporting from the Center for Public Integrity today. They suggested that there's only 16,000 in the national stockpile. Can you just give us some clarity? How many ventilators do you have in the national stockpile? Who else is making them, and how long will it take for them to make a critical mass? Because based on the Center for Public Integrity, it appears there aren't enough if people are going to die as a result.
Ventilators has been a singular focus of a good portion of our supply chain stabilization task force at FEMA since the President stood up FEMA's National Response Center. And we're making progress in a variety of ways. First, there is the national stockpile which you refer, and depending on what's been distributed. We just delivered 4,000 ventilators to New York, including ventilators that we sent to New York City. But there's that number of some 20,000, less than 20,000. I won't dispute your number. Beyond that, there literally are, by most estimates, more than 150,000 ventilators in the broad healthcare system all across the country. We also, working with anesthesiologists, and there was a very important conference call today, we have determined several weeks ago that the devices that anesthesiologists use for outpatient surgery can be converted with the change of a single vent to a very useful ventilator. I actually spoke to Governor Cuomo about that today. He's in the process of surveying all of his surgical centers, as governors around the country are doing. We literally believe there's tens of thousands of ventilators that can be converted now that the FDA has...
Now, the Vice President is celebrating the 4,000 ventilators that FEMA is sending to New York, and this is a good thing. But Governor Cuomo has said that to meet the state's needs, New York will need 30,000 ventilators.
Production, those contracts are being reviewed. We're vetting their capability. But one of the other ideas is, as we look at areas of the country that are most impacted, and now more than half of the cases for coronavirus are in New York State and in the region around there.
Additionally, the Society of Critical Care suggests that the nation could need over 1 million ventilators to address this crisis. And as the questioner mentioned, the existing stock is somewhere around between 160 and 200,000.
Coronavirus, and making sure that we're manufacturing, backfilling, and meeting that need. But what I can tell you is we've got an extraordinary team. Admiral Polovchek is a two-star Navy admiral who's doing an incredible job. We literally are identifying resources around the country and around the world. We're contracting and arranging transportation for those. But maybe Dr. Birch, you can speak to the ventilator, particularly the transition.
Thank you, sir. So I just want to thank Dr. Mary Peterson and the whole team of the American Association of Anesthesiologists, because they immediately, when we asked them, could these be modified, they went to immediate work on it. They're going to have Q&As up but more importantly, every anesthesiologist in every city has been working with their state and local health officials to really work with them how to change this. And I think that's not only the ventilators that they'll be supplying, they have the people that run those ventilators that are not any longer doing elective surgery. So changing that elective surgery piece over a week ago has freed up a lot of additional resources. When I talk to you about how we've done some things that are very horizontal across the country, but we're collecting data now in a county by county granular way. So it's like any epidemic, it's not equal everywhere. There are places that are very spared, and there's places where there's more. We have a very vast country with a lot of capacity and a lot of infrastructure. And so looking very specifically about where the virus has been, where is it going, who's got freed up resources from where it has been, because it didn't hit it hit Washington State earlier than it hit New York, and looking at all of those pieces to really ensure how we can innovatively move equipment around based on the need. And so I know that it has become a place where people are looking at numbers rather than what is needed. Because if you do these projections, when you got to those projections that said, like in Germany and others, that implied that 60% or 50% of the population would get infected, I want to be very clear, the only way that happens is this virus remains continuously moving through populations in this cycle, in the fall cycle, and another cycle. So that's through 3 cycles with nothing being done. And so we're dealing with cycle A right now, not the one that could come in the fall of 2020, although we're getting prepared for it by the innovations that are being worked on, and not the 2021. We're really dealing with the here and now while we're planning for the future. And I think the numbers that have been put out there are actually very frightening to people. But I can tell you, if you go back and look at Wuhan and Hubei and all of these provinces, when they talk about 60,000 people being infected, even if you said, oh, right, well, there's asymptomatics and all of that, so you get to 600,000 people out of 80 million. That is nowhere close to the numbers that you see people putting out there. I think it has frightened the American people. I think on a model that you just run full out, you can get to those numbers if you have zero controls and you do nothing. And we know that every American is doing something. And so I think what our job right now is to carefully detail on a hospital by hospital, state by state, county by county, to outline what the infrastructure needs are and ensure that we're meeting them, both from the stockpile and from the generosity and movement of the American people and other hospitals.
Dr. Burks, a lot of folks out there, well-intentioned, are sewing cloth masks and donating them to hospitals. So you or Dr. Fauci, can you weigh in on that? Because obviously these people have great intentions, but there's some mixed feedback on whether that's a good idea.
I'm sorry.
Better than nothing? Lots of surgical masks. People are sewing them. So clothing manufacturers, volunteers dropping them off at hospitals. Is that necessary? Is that helpful? Is it something you'd recommend?
Well, I mean, you would only recommend that under desperate situations if you don't have any masks. But what we're seeing now, as you've heard, is a rather significant inflow of masks that are coming in that are going to be available. I mean, obviously, if you don't have a mask and you need a mask and it's appropriate for you to be wear it, you do what you can. But I don't see that now as a necessity, given what's going on right now.
Great. Great.
Mr. Vice President?
We'll take a couple more. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We keep hearing reports of competition among states that are trying to buy this necessary equipment on the private market. And the governor of Kentucky said yesterday that his state was in line to buy some equipment, but FEMA came in and purchased it from under them. So he says this is creating a real problem for states because on the one hand, they're being told to get the equipment themselves if they can, but on the other hand, the federal government is buying up the supply chain. So is this a problem that you're hearing about, and what is your advice to states like Kentucky that are having this issue?
I actually spoke to the governor of Michigan today, Governor Whitmer and I, about just that. And we put our FEMA regional representative right on the case. We want to make sure that we're acquiring every bit as much as we can through FEMA, but as we work with the supply chain, we want to have full coordination with the states and the requests they're making and hospitals that they're making, and we're looking into those matters. But make no mistake about it, this FEMA team at the President's direction is leaning into this effort, leaving no stone unturned, literally searching not just the nation but the world for all these critical supplies, and as the President just reported to you, we're in the process of shipping 9.4 million N95 respirators, 20 million surgical masks, 3.1 million face shields, and the list goes on, and we're going to be
again, the Vice President is saying that they're leaving no stone unturned, but numerous governors and even conservative Senator Ted Cruz have called upon this administration to use the Defense Production Act to require companies to produce this equipment in large scale. The Department of Health and Human Services estimates that 3.5 billion face masks will be needed for the U.S. to face this crisis.
Is adequately supplied.
Well, I'm going to let Dr. Burks address that as well, but let me say again, I just received a report. We're going to be detailing it before the end of the week, where we've literally identified significant resources, not just around the country but around the world, of the masks that can be used by healthcare workers. And but as Dr. Burks said, we are focusing those resources in the areas where healthcare workers are most exposed to the prospect of contracting the coronavirus. The President's made it clear from early on, right after seeing the needs of Americans who are struggling with the coronavirus, making sure they have the support that they need on the same level of priority. We want our healthcare workers to have the personal protective equipment to be able to do their job safely, and we're working on that. I will tell you, I spoke about this today to several governors, not only the governor of Michigan, but the governor of Indiana, and President Trump and I couldn't be more grateful. The way governors around the country are joining us in calling on businesses to go back to their warehouses and identify industrial masks, N95 masks, that because of the change that President Trump insisted on in the law, can now be used by hospital workers. And they're perfectly acceptable to protect a healthcare worker from the possibility of a respiratory disease. But we're calling on, and our governors are joining us in calling on every business across America during this time of a great challenge where many businesses are idled. Go back to your storehouses, identify N95 industrial masks, and as I told our governors today, they can call FEMA, they can call the state healthcare services, or they can just load them up on a flatbed and drive them over to their local hospital. And literally, we hear stories in every state in the union of people doing that. And so it's happening all at the same time, and we'll be detailing the progress we're making on masks. Anything further, Deb?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I just wanted to add one piece, and this is really a call to every state out there and every county that has been doing community-based testing. The FDA put out new guidance, we talked about it several days ago, that people can do self-testing in the drive-thru, where you give them the materials to do it in their car and you pick it up in a biohazard bag. This would free up all of that PPE that you see being utilized in those drive-thrus back to the hospitals and back to the clinics that need it the most. We have to move to the new technology. FDA worked tirelessly to get that out there so that it could be sparing of gowns and gloves and full respiratory N95s. This is the moment to move to that self-testing front of nose with the new applicators that can be utilized so that every single bit of the N95s can be put into the hospitals that need it.
Dr. Burks?
Dr. Vice President?
Let me just say we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. We'll be back here with further progress and news. But if I could just say to every American, we'll get through this. We'll get through this. But we'll get through this together. Every American needs to understand that whether you are in an area that's impacted by the coronavirus or an area where there's very few cases, if you do your part to put into practice 15 days to slow the spread, you will do just...
I do want to share a quote from Governor Cuomo about why just calling on companies is not the same thing as directing them through the Defense Production Act. He said, when we went to war, we didn't say, any company out there want to build a battleship? Who wants to build a battleship? Maybe a couple of you guys could get together and build a battleship? Instead, you direct the production of these things. And the problem is that companies could be making these masks, could be making these PPEs, and they have not been directed to. The president has directed governors to get them on their own. Maryland's Governor Larry Hogan said that he has, Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker said that he was actually outbid by the federal government while he was trying to order supplies. Anyway, that is today's Coronavirus Task Force press briefing. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Please stay safe. Use this time to keep yourself safe, your family safe. Tell the people you love how much they matter to you. And we will all get through this together, and NowThis will do our best to keep you informed. Thank you. I'm Alan Piper, and on behalf of our team, stay safe and have a good night.